Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war frontline update and it's the first one for 17 days. It's an awful long time to have left this mapping update, so I apologize for that. And actually, I'm going to fairly quickly run through the front line because I haven't been paying granular attention to what's been going on in a number of places other than, say, Pokrovsk a little bit, Kupiansk more so actually. And so really it's going to be looking at the changes to the mapping without giving you details of this, unit attacked here and did this and they went up that tree line and down this gully and whatever. It's just going to be, this is how much the map has changed in almost 3 weeks, and expect there to be quite a bit of change in favor of the Russians, of course, as they are grinding on. That said, there are a number of pins of both colors here. Let me just explain the map to you for those who haven't seen before or I can't remember since it's been so long. In the meantime, though, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. If you subscribe to the channel, if you haven't already done so, please click the bell icon and press the all rather than the personalized updates, and that'd be fantastic. Okay, let's get into it. Right, okay, so now we have the front line here. We're going to start up in the north in Sumy. We have a whole mottled board of pins, if you like, map of pins. Although there are, even though it seems like there are quite a lot of blue pins, there are far more red pins and blue. Remember, I have two mappers, Andrew Perpetua, who's an objective mapper in my opinion, and Syriac Maps, who is fairly avowedly pro-Russian, although he would deny it. It just basically regurgitates what the Ministry of Defense claim and then moves the mapping accordingly. But it's interesting to see the claims, and quite often it's prescient because even though the Russians do make a claim that they've taken a place, they often haven't done at the time that Syriac Maps claims it, but then 2-3 weeks later they invariably have. And so he gets away with not seeming too wrong because eventually he does become right, just it's not accurate at the time anyway. So the red pins suggest that the Russians have made advances, and that is a difference between the previous map and the present line. If it's a dark red pin, it's Syriac Maps, and if it's a pinker pin, it's Andrew Perpetua. That's a defensive line gain for the Russians, and the blues are defensive line gains for the Ukrainians, but it's still the Russian defensive line. So we're only talking about where the Russians are. Of course, anywhere the other side of these lines, there will be for example, this orange line is Syriac Maps Russian defensive line, and that's according, as I said, to Syriac Maps. But then there will be a gray zone, and then there will be Ukrainian control somewhere further, in this case south from there. Now, what's interesting here is the Ukrainians have made really significant gains in the Sumy area, taking Kondrativka, taking Andriivka back, taking all of Oleksivka, as according to Andrew Perpetua, or at least it being contested. Syriac Map seems to claim that the Russians have taken back loads of the ground here in this area. Now, this is not something that is agreed upon by Andrew Perpetua, who still has this broadly as it was, or exactly as it was the last time I did an update 17 days ago. There might be grey zone contests going on here, but no change to Andrew Perpetua. So that might tell you something. But anyway, it could be that the Ukrainians are under the cosh a bit in the Sumy area, as both sides. So initially the Russians moved their troops out of here to pull them down to Pokrovsk because they were really struggling in Pokrovsk. Then the Ukrainians took advantage of that. Then the Ukrainians really needed to pull their troops back from here rather than take all this land back to the border. That was less useful than defending key areas like Pokrovsk. So they could have brought their troops down from there, and that allowed the Russians maybe to then push again. Now, around Vovchansk, this is an area where the Russians have been pushing back slowly, although really big differences of opinion between the two mappers here. The blue line is Andrew Perpetua's understanding where the Russians are defensively. They are consolidated behind there, able to supply that kind of area. And then anywhere to the south, in this case, of the blue line, it is grey zone and then Ukrainian controlled, and that would be pockets of both sides being in and around these areas close to the defensive line. Well, Surat Maps has the Russians way further to the southeast here, just having taken all of Vovchansk, which is what they have consistently claimed. Shoigu and Putin making these claims. Andrew Perpetua admitting that over the last 17 days there have been some gains over to the northeast of this sector. But again, just like Sumy, not agreeing that the Russians have taken all of this land to the south. Now, are they under pressure? Yes, I think Vovchansk is an area where the Russians are really pushing the Ukrainians, but also there's quite a bit of footage that has come out there of Russians taking some fairly heavy losses too. This is a worrying area which is north of the it's very north of the eastern front line that goes all the way down here, Prosk. This is, of course, Kupiansk, but then you have Milove and another area to the northwest here. Milove is in the northwest, area to the southeast here that goes up to the Oskil River. And the Russians not only getting across the Oskil River, if you look at where this dark area is, that signifies the trees near the river. And you got this white chalk bluff that goes along it. So they got across there, up over the bluff, and they have been basically fairly consistently taking land here. Although in 17 days, there's no change to the front line in this area. So I find that interesting. Although they are pushing south of the border, and that's something of a worry. Now, okay, we're on to Kupiansk. And as you can see here, both Andrew Perpetua and Surat Maps have some really significant gains for the Ukrainians here, going right back up towards the sort of Kalinyove area, north up the Oskil. But Surat Maps seems to think the Russians have then gained going to the east of the Oskil River in this pocket where Andrew Perpetua just doesn't agree at all. There's just huge differences between the two mappers. So if you just to reiterate what these pins mean, these dark pink or puce pins suggest that that's where Surat Maps 17 days ago had the orange line, and now the orange line is down here, which suggests that all of this area in between has been taken. All of that pocket has been taken by the Russians. Andrew Perpetua thinks that actually it's still even further back than when Surat Maps claimed the Russian defensive line was 17 days ago. There's a gain here as well, according to Surat Maps. And then Kupiansk itself, actually interesting that Surat Maps is still holding on to Russian control south of these crossroads. Absolutely incredible. And that might have something to do with there still being some pockets here, but it's not a contiguous line, as in you can't get supplies, across land down into this end of the Russian salient here. There's like a deep state map will have like a small patch here and a small patch over there, but essentially they're completely surrounded. So it kind of started looking like this. But even so, this is December the 5th, right? And on this map, here's the crossroads. On December the 5th, Grayskull here didn't have the Russians any further south than those crossroads. Well, this is the crossroads here. So, okay, Surat Maps is well out, in my opinion. Here's another mapper. This is End Strike. Crossroads are up there, actually pushing. So this was December the 2nd, actually. Sorry, that's in the wrong order. So this was the initial push. The Russians just south of the crossroads. Then they were pushed up from the south. The Ukrainians moving up in between these two roads there, pushing into this area and clearing the Russians out of that land. And that was the second. Then you're on to the 5th here, where they carried on clearing back past the crossroads there. And here we have, what's this, the 9th now? And you got the crossroads down here, and they're starting to clear the western part of Kupiansk, the city area there. And you've got where do we have it? Moskovka here. It's called different things depending on how it's transcribed. Basically clearing out all of this area at that time. So pushing up from there, pushing in from the west. Also, their pressure, Surat Maps might not have any agreement here, but Ukraine is also supposedly controlling this area, which meant that the Russians really were in a lot of trouble because they're having to feed themselves, supply themselves up from here, getting across the river, which was difficult enough, and then coming all the way down and supplying their troops in Kupiansk. So they're no doubt having to do a lot of drone trips to drop off supplies for their troops there. And Institute for the Study of War, this is on the 13th of December, showing a bit of an infographic of how they saw it happening, pushing them the Russians out from the south and then from the west, and then leaving this pocket inside Kupiansk, which is not contiguous, that is cut off. And that's what the ISW was saying back now 5 days ago. You have Jürgen Naudit here giving us a well, this is actually the 10th, but I've included this because it gives you a sense of cutting them off at the top almost initially. That was one of the main kind of attacks, or one of the main tactics, because you've got the river coming down north to south here. You can cut the Russians off here. It means that they cannot supply their troops across land, and they have to do it across the river here. And so, if you're controlling quite a lot of area to the east of the Oskil River, then you really just have a very narrow neck of opportunity to supply your troops in the whole Kupiansk sector. And it all kind of went downhill from there. This was then on the 15th, where the Russians were admitting a deteriorating situation in Kupiansk, according to them. Ukrainian forces using elements of multiple brigades, assault units and special forces operators have pushed deeper into the city, liberating new areas. Russians acknowledge they were pushed back across the Oskil River. And most recently, you've had claims that the Russians were still in a position down here, and that they were walking around the streets. I talked about that in my Hits and Losses video this morning. They released a video of a Russian saying it's the 15th of December and I'm still in this location. But actually, it was then later found to be in Tavolzhanka, which is right up here. So that was where it was actually recorded, in some streets of Tavolzhanka somewhere. And they claimed it was geolocated to here. And so you had Russians saying it's all a lie. The Ukrainians haven't taken Kupiansk because we geolocated our guys down here. And it was just a massive lie from the Russians. And that was debunked over the last 24 hours. So here is the map of Clement Mollin. This is from 3 days ago. So this is out of date now, but it gives you a sense of how it all happened. The Ukrainian forces liberated most of Kupiansk city in a rather uncommon counterattack, despite setbacks in Pokrovsk, Siversk, and Vovchansk. I've heard about Vovchansk already. Counteroffensive operations in Kupiansk managed to save the city and its surroundings for additional months. A few days ago, Zelensky, if you remember, filmed himself at the entrance of the city of Kupiansk. Again, the Russians tried to lie about that, said that he recorded that before the war in February 2022. And you're like, well, he's got a slightly fatter face than he did. He looks quite a lot older. He's got a beard, and he didn't have a beard then. And he's got an iPhone 17 Pro, which didn't exist 4 years ago. So that's a load of rubbish. Anyway, less than a month after Putin claimed it was liberated by Russian forces, inviting Western medias into it, as Putin did. A year ago, Russian forces crossed the Oskil River for the first time in the Dvorichna area. So this is Dvorichna. You've got Kupiansk down here. And that was where you can see these bluffs up here. They're not entirely down the Oskil River here, but it did make it difficult for the Russians to get across the Oskil River. Back then, the infiltration remained small. However, during the spring and the summer of this year, they accumulated forces using underground pipes to enter Kupiansk city. Since the summer, hundreds of Russian soldiers managed to push into Kupiansk city through small boats and pipes. In October, Russian deep reconnaissance groups and flags were sighted all over the strategic city, which was previously occupied, and then liberated by the Ukrainians back in 2022. There's one such image there. Since October, Ukrainian forces conducted multiple small-scale counter-offensives, fighting in central Kupiansk and cutting supplies to the city, destroying the pipes and the boats on Oskil River. The operation was very long, and it is still ongoing, with clearing operations taking place now. And it's thought that the Russians are holed up in a number of high-rise buildings there at the moment. With this counter-offensive that was announced by Ukrainian forces and confirmed by multiple videos of Ukrainian fighters in the city, the fall of Kupiansk has been largely delayed. Still, clearing operations continue in the city centre, and the grey zone is still here. So this is, as you can see, this is quite a zoomed out version, but Deep State map has variously, I think there's a slightly different one now, where they have two, there's a tiny pocket, I think somewhere around here, but you can see from this map, there are 2 pockets of Russian control still well within Kupiansk, but massive gains to the north and to the northwest there, and taking land up to the Oskil River, making it just really difficult for the Russians to be able to hold on to the land there. So many said this victory is not significant. I disagree, says Molan. Kupiansk is a strategic hub and defensive urban area. It protects the rear of the Oskil River and allows Ukrainian forces to still hold territory west of the Oskil. It also protects the northern Vovchansk line. With Kupiansk in their hands, Russian forces should have continued west. So here you go. That you can see. He's saying that basically it helps to protect along here the Oskil, and also just stops the Russians from advancing and then taking the Kupiansk sector from another direction. So, with Kupiansk in their hands, the Russian forces could have continued west to Shevchenkove and later Chuhiv. Without Kupiansk, though, they will need to push from the border to Veliki Burluk, a longer way around. So they're going to have to come this way around. It makes it more difficult with the terrain and whatnot. This movement already started with the city of Vovchansk nearly falling completely into Russian control, and with additional push on the eastern side of the Kharkiv Oblast. So, you can see what the Russians are trying to do to essentially take all of this land here and get closer to Chuhiv and to Kharkiv itself as well. A Ukrainian victory in Kupiansk should not make us forget the critical situations elsewhere. Siversk has fallen, Pokrovsk and Myrnahorod are nearly fallen, infiltrations into Huliapole and Kostyantynivka. At least maybe people will now understand that a flag does not mean an area is controlled by a side, and this is something that the Russians so frequently do. Okay, and so the latest, this is today's map from Null Reports, in fact, just out now. Russians in Kupiansk have been completely cut off from supplies, he says. A small contingent of Russians hidden in basements is present in the center. It will take some time, but they will eventually give up, surrender, or just get killed, just like the Kucherev Yar pocket. So that's, I guess, going back to the Dobropilia sector as well. So you got the claim here is you've got one small pocket there in the southern area. I think that looks like that's at that crossroads there. So yeah, that is what's taken place in Kupiansk. That's been the big success for the Ukrainians in recent times, and one of the few successes really for them. I mean, there might be pushes and shoves in a number of places. Indeed, the mappers around this sector, Lazova, really going towards the Oskil River. It comes further down south towards Borova. I used to call this the Pischani sector, didn't I? Is because Pischani's around here somewhere, but I think it's way further back now. I don't know where you've gone. Oh yeah, it's up there. But yeah, it's a lot further south now. But anyway, claims that the Ukrainians have been holding on to this pocket and been fighting back, as according to both mappers to some degree, but the Russians also making some gains, well, at least according again to Syriac maps. No Russian gains there as far as Andrew Perpetua is concerned. The same as we come further to the south, some gains according to Syriac maps. And then we're into the Liman sector, where there's a considerable difference of opinion here. And that's a pretty significant difference of opinion, because really you've got the Russians a lot further to the west, as according to Syriac maps. Really, this is the Liman sector, where Liman itself is very much getting surrounded from the north. The Russians are getting very close to Liman from the Serebyansky forest. It is definitely really tough for the Ukrainians here. Indeed, this is going back to December the 3rd. So bear in mind, this is 2 weeks ago. Third Army Corps officially refutes information about the so-called breakthrough of the Russians in Liman. The Corps units repels 40 assaults a day on the approaches to Liman and does not allow the enemy to enter the city, said the Brigadier General Beletsky, the Corps commander there. I include that just to let you know that this is one of the areas we probably don't hear enough about, because it's all about Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. But this is an area where the Russians are really pushing, and you can see they've had considerable success, particularly to the south, pushing towards Siversk and really into Siversk, which is right here. Now, both mappers agree that the Russians at least control uh, probably over 50% of Siversk now, with Syriac maps saying that the Russians have taken way more and, galloped on towards the west there. It just goes to show. I mean, more and more we are seeing just a huge difference between these two mappers. I mean, look at it all in this whole Liman sector. Just the difference is huge between what these mappers say. Uh, but it probably does indicate that the Russians do have deep reconnaissance groups, and they do have people or vehicles that are operating to some degree in these areas. It's going to be fairly porous, and lines don't do justice to the nature of the front lines, as in drawing a line on a map rather than it being a bit more like a sponge with pockets within larger areas of control from both sides, right? Um, but Seversk, this is a bit of a disaster area for the Ukrainians, and you know, although we do see a lot of success for the Ukrainians in terms of deep strikes with FP2 drones in the near ear, and then FP1 drones and Lyutis and Neptunes and maybe Flamingos and all sorts of other things striking, whether it be a submarine with an underwater drone or oil refineries, depots, ammunition depots, air bases and planes and all that kind of stuff. The Ukrainians are doing a really good job there, but on the front lines, it is tough. Now, okay, this is a 17-day update, but this Siversk area is super, super worrying for the Ukrainians. And at least according to Syriac maps, they're making continued gains coming further to the south. And in fact, right around Chaziv Yar, although a bit of a pushback around Mikhailivka. But yeah, again, mainly coming from Syriac maps. Andrew Perpetua admitting that the Russians have made some gains north of Bilahora. That's now fully under their control. This is the whole Kostyantynivka area. That there are, there may well be, there are troops in and around all this area. The Russians are knocking on the door of Kostyantynivka. There is fighting on the outskirts, and they are getting deep reconnaissance groups or the odd squad here and there infiltrating. Does that mean that they have control of all of this land? Andrew Perpetua thinks no. Syriac maps thinks yes. But it's going to be somewhere in the middle of these two, probably. The Kostyantynivka is in a lot of trouble. Play far back on, goodness me, when was this? This is, I don't know why it's not rendering. On the 9th of December, saying then some good news from Kostyantynivka. So it's a good 9 days ago. Russian forces, since my last report, were not able to make any significant progress in this direction. This is probably the result of combined work with FPVs and artillery over an extended period of time, which forced the Russians to slow down due to gradual attrition and casualties. Ukrainian forces are now mostly working on southern Ivanopilia and even Pleshchivka, which is another indicator of possible Russians slowing down in that direction. No movement recorded also west of Ivanopilia, and in the northern part of the settlement itself. The same goes for the Shekovo sector. No new Russian advances or consolidations there. Okay, so we've got Ivanopilia there, but this was 9 days ago, Pleshchivka. And that is further to the west of where Andrew Perpetua was saying they were. So the point being that there could well be much more Russian presence in this area than Andrew Perpetua has confidently said, but it's kind of porous, as we've been discussing, although he admits, been making gains of Russians to the south of Kostyantynivka. So that's another worry as well. And then you've got all of this in the Pokrovsk direction. So the claims here are, I mean, if we were to take all the pins away at the moment, it's probably confusing things a little too much. But you can see that Andrew Perpetua has the Russians very much looking to almost completely encircle Myrnahrad. If we get rid of Andrew's pins and Syriac Maps' pins, that is the current state of affairs there. So Andrew Perpetua would have all of this as kind of dark bluish, clear blue. So in fact, we can do that. Let's compare. So Andrew Perpetua would say, right, you have the Russians very much surrounding Myrnihrad, but the Ukrainians still operating in Pokrovsk, still operating in Myrnihrad. Still, there'll be grey zone here, so it's not to say that this is all controlled by the Ukrainians, but it is likely largely grey zone where they're fighting over this an awful lot. And then Surat Maps, on the other hand, has a completely different interpretation, saying the Ukrainians are genuinely utterly encircled within Myrnihrad, and Pokrovsk has been completely and utterly taken. That they're not fighting on the northern in this northern area, north of the railway line and whatnot in Pokrovsk. It's just a massively different interpretation of what is going on. Is quite incredible. So yeah, I'll add the pins back, but it's going to look very confusing here because we have 17 days of an awful lot of activity. Andrew Perpetua even claiming that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back in a northern area of Pokrovsk as well. So, anyway, that's the interpretation in Pokrovsk. We talk about that a lot. We know that they are somewhat surrounded, like genuinely, like functionally fairly surrounded in Myrnihrad, and they are supplying those troops with, so that's right in the middle here, with drones, predominantly unmanned ground vehicles and unmanned aerial vehicles, to keep these guys supplied as they have been doing this operational withdrawal from the further reaches to the south. And then consolidating in Myrnihrad to pull themselves, I assume, to pull themselves out of Myrnihrad and probably equalize this front line here. I mean, there are fairly decent fortifications in this general area. So really, what the Ukrainians, you've got to fight somewhere. This is what I've been saying. If you just pull out, some people are saying, oh, they hold on to these places too long. They should pull out of Myrnihrad, pull out of Pokrovsk. Okay, well, you pull out of Pokrovsk, then the Russians just follow you. Where are you going to fight? Dobropilia. Then Dobropilia. But then is Dobropilia as easy to defend as Pokrovsk? No. So you might as well defend in Pokrovsk. The idea that they hold on to places too long is sometimes a little bit simplistic, because you have to fight somewhere. Otherwise, you just give up the country and move out. The idea that you just keep retreating means that, well, you'll be in Kiev by next Tuesday. So you've got to fight somewhere. It's about picking where to fight. And sometimes you do need to retreat. But the idea is you're not just retreating ad infinitum, that you're retreating to a better defensible position. So maybe you're biding time to dig better fortifications further back. But if you don't have those fortifications, then you might as well fight here if there's no real defensive difference between here and there, right? Now, further to the south, where the Ukrainians have been seen to retake Ivanivka, and there's been this fighting going on around the Vovcha River here, you've got Surat Maps admitting that the Ukrainians have made some gains in Novopavlivka. In fact, I think we've got some recent claims about that. Yeah, here's one from some time back. I don't know what's going on with the browser today. Sorry about this. So this is from the 5th, actually. So that's almost 2 weeks ago. The Ukrainians pushing back in Novopavlivka to the north there. So that's this area that Surat Maps is admitting that Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back there, and southeast and southwest of Novopavlivka, but also around Ivanivka, with Andrew Perpetua saying the Russians have been pushed back to pretty much Zeleny High, whereas Surat Maps thinks the Russians have control, right up to the Vovcha River, and then even beyond it in some places, and certainly beyond it towards Filia and up to Novopavlivka here. So this is what's going on south of Pokrovsk, and that's another area where the Ukrainians have had some success. So Ivanivka was a good bit of success for them. I don't know if I've got where is this? Southeast of Pokrovsk, Lysivka and Suky Yar, tactical withdrawal. Oh yeah, that was when the Ukrainians were tactical withdrawing from in the Myrnihrad, Suky Yar. Here we go, in Lysivka. So that was, so if you look at that, that was back on the 8th. So on the 8th, and we're now at 10 days from there, they pulled back from there towards Myrnaharad. Okay, anyway, coming down then. So then we get to another huge worry. So really, you've got Liman is a worry in that area, Siversk, as it's further south from Liman. And then really Huliapole and this southern part of the Eastern Front line. This has been a very successful area for the Russians, all things considered. And they probably haven't taken the attritional casualties here that they have in places like Pokrovsk, where they're grinding on and taking insane losses. It's been somewhat easier here, partly because the defenses were kind of west-east, and the Russians were expected to be attacking from the south, but actually they just came in from the east and have kind of advanced along the defenses, and the Ukrainians just haven't been able to stop them, and they've made all of this gain, I'd say, fairly quickly. It's slow, really, in comparison to many wars, but they were Uruzhany, if you remember, Velika Novosilka, and then back at Vuhledar back there. And this is one of the areas where they've had, I think, the most success in terms of square kilometers per day, I guess. And as you can see here, although there's a huge difference between the interpretation of both mappers, the blue line of Andrew Perpetua's way back from the orange line of Suryat maps. Nonetheless, there is agreement that the Ukrainians are under all sorts of pressure in Huliapole, with Suryat maps claiming that the Russians really control, I guess, most of Huliapole. If you see it going all the way back to here, and the Ukrainians holding on to the western part of it, whereas Andrew Perpetua has the Russians not controlling any of Huliapole at all, although it will be largely contested with fighting inside Huliapole. So just huge differences of opinion, but the direction of travel is pretty obvious here. The Russians are, fighting over Huliapole. Will this be the truth in a couple of weeks' time? Almost certainly. Will the Russians take Huliapole? Almost certainly. It's how much pain can the Ukrainians exact and extract on and from the Russians, and what they do about this. So the problem that the Ukrainians have, and I know, you listen to people like Paul Warburg, and he says, oh, they don't have a mobilization problem. They've still got this big, they haven't mobilized 18 to 25-year-olds and blah, blah, blah. But no, this is a problem. They need these people now. They need thousands of people right now. So you can talk about, okay, they still got a big pot of people they can pull from potentially. The reality is they aren't pulling from them. They don't have those people, and they aren't. And if they do have them in different areas of Ukraine, I don't know, training or doing this or rotating or whatever, they're not here at the moment in large enough numbers. Huliapole is a real worry because you've got some major settlements that this can start unlocking. I know it looks like it's quite a long way away, Dnipro, Pavlohrad, but reality is, you start getting missile launchers closer to these places. Zaporizhia is already getting a bit of a shellacking these days. Marhanets and Nikopol, horrendous there. And the Russians are also advancing up, or at least according to Suryat maps, the reservoir through kind of Plavny and up near Stepna here. Now, the Ukrainians have pushed them back here. Suryat map seems to think that the Russians have made some quite extensive gains there. I would probably contest that as being true. I haven't looked in enough detail here, but as far as I'm aware, the Ukrainians are doing quite a good job of holding the Russians at bay there. There's a lot of drone successful Ukrainian drone usage around here, Stepnahirsk, and they are certainly making the Russians work for it. But I don't know, over the last couple of days, could that have been a sudden gain for the Russians, or is that very much this is what the Russian MOD have claimed, so I'll put it on my map type thing? And then a claim that the Ukrainians have pushed back in Malotokmachka, actually literally in Malotokmachka. This is getting very close to Orikhiv, which is a very important sort of staging place for the Ukrainian forces for this whole area, for the whole southern front line. As you can see, it's very much a logistical hub in terms of the roads, but the Russians are getting dangerously close to that around Novodanilivka area and Malotokmachka. So, yeah, the Ukrainians will want to keep them at bay there. This has been a fairly stable part of the front line because the fortifications have been well built there and they are able to withstand attacks from the south. It's just this whole area over here, which is definitely a concern. The long and the short of it is, Ukraine, their weakness in this whole war is what's going on the front lines. Their strength is what they can do with their weapons, and if they can scale their weapons up, and the strength is therefore using those weapons against Russia's economy as well as Russia's war effort. And it's very interesting starting to see FP2 drone footage of strikes around, say, Pokrovsk, and that's what they really need to do. They need to. They are going to struggle to mobilize people to stop the Russian forces with people, like, in trenches, stopping the Russians attacking them. So they need to hit the Russians before they attack when they are billeted in a building and hit those logistics. And I think FP2 drones, I mean, it's great to see them getting used, deep into occupied territory. And that will largely be, stopping the frontline activity by hitting ammunition depots, as we saw in Luhansk last night or this morning. The video I showed was of, I don't know exactly where it was, but somewhere in Luhansk, an artillery depot being hit. That all needs to, I guess, continue to happen, but as well they need to be hitting troop accumulations right on the front line with as much as they possibly can. There seems to be a lack of HIMARS now compared to earlier on in the war. That seemed to be the weapon of choice for those kinds of strikes, maybe. And let's just hope they're getting more guided glide bombs and more strike drones that they can use on the front lines. Sadly enough, we're hearing the news of a Mi-24 attack helicopter that was the claim was it was defending against a Russian attack. I don't know if that was anywhere near the front lines or whether this was a helicopter that was trying to take out a Shahed drone, and then maybe the drone blew up too close to it. But I think they've lost the crew of the entire helicopter. So that's a Mi-24 that has gone down somewhere. I'm sure we'll find out more about that tomorrow, but that's a bad bit of news for the Ukrainians. Anyway, that's the Frontline 17-day update for you. Hope that was useful. Please check out people like Scruffy Tales. I don't know how frequently he's posting at the moment. He's quite busy, but he has a much more granular set of mapping updates than I can presently do at the moment because I'm sort of commenting on too much other stuff. But hopefully that was at least of some use. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.